Moscow, January 1972. The Dynamo Sports Palace, a building that had survived 2 wars and hosted 31 national championships in the preceding decade alone. The temperature outside was 11 degrees below zero. Inside, beneath lights that had been burning since 6 in the morning, the air carried the particular smell of resin and effort and men who had been working since before sunrise. The floor of the main hall was covered in competition mat, blue and red, 240 square meters of it, and on that mat, for the past 4 hours, something extraordinary had been happening. His name was Viktor Sokolov. He was 26 years old. He stood 6 feet and 2 inches in his bare feet and weighed 302 pounds on the morning of that day. A figure that the event organizers had confirmed twice because the number seemed implausible until you saw him in person. He had been wrestling since the age of 9. He had won the Soviet national championship 3 consecutive years running. He had never, in 11 years of competition, been taken from his feet by an opponent who outweighed him by less than 60 pounds. His arms, when extended, had a reach that coaches measured at over 80 inches. His grip, once established, was a thing that did not release. 3 of his opponents at the previous national championship had required the trainer to physically separate Sokolov's hands from their clothing after the match had been called. He was not a cruel man, that is important to understand. He was not posturing. He was not invented. He was genuinely, measurably, by every metric that sport had devised to measure such things, one of the most dangerous, unarmed men on the planet in that moment. And he knew it. That was the only problem Viktor Sokolov had. He knew it with the kind of certainty that does not leave room for revision. The event was an international martial arts cultural exchange, arranged through back channels by a film production company and 2 European sporting federations. 14 disciplines were represented. Men had come from 12 countries. The interpreter on staff that week later said it was the most concentrated collection of trained fighters he had ever stood in the same room with, and he had spent 3 years working at the Munich Olympics the previous summer. In the 3rd row of the spectator area, on a folding chair near the aisle, sat a man who had arrived that morning without announcement. He was 31 years old, though he looked younger in the way that certain men do when their stillness reads as calm rather than age. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed 140 pounds. He was wearing dark trousers, a plain white shirt with the top button open, and shoes that were not athletic shoes. He had a cup of tea beside him on the floor, resting against the leg of his chair, and he was watching the mat the way a man watches something he has spent his entire life learning to see. His name was Bruce Lee. 312 people were in that building, and in 11 minutes, using 3 movements, the number of which is not in dispute because 5 of the witnesses wrote it down independently within 24 hours, everything that those 312 people believed about size and force and the nature of a fight was going to be permanently revised. Nobody in that room, with one exception, knew what they were about to see. That one exception was the man in the folding chair. If you have stayed with this channel before, you already know that what happens next does not end when the action ends. The sentence Viktor Sokolov spoke from the floor of the Dynamo Sports Palace that afternoon was repeated in training halls and coaches' offices from Leningrad to Los Angeles for the following 30 years. It was never printed in any newspaper. It was carried entirely by word of mouth. We will get to that sentence. Stay until the end. Viktor Sokolov had demonstrated twice that morning. The first demonstration was against a judo practitioner from Poland who weighed 217 pounds. The match lasted 8 seconds, not because it was called early, because it was over in 8 seconds. The Polish judoka attempted a hip throw of textbook construction, and Sokolov did not move in the direction he was supposed to move. He moved into the throw, absorbed it at the root, and reversed it. The pole went sideways into the mat, and the sound it made was heard at the back of the building. The second demonstration was a voluntary partner drill with a Mongolian wrestling coach who had been working in that discipline for 22 years. The coach had shoulders that several people in the room described in their notes as architectural. Sokolov worked with him for 6 minutes. At the end of those 6 minutes, the coach sat down on the edge of the mat and did not stand immediately. He sat there with his hands on his knees, breathing. One of the French observers wrote in his journal that evening that the Mongolian coach sat on that mat the way a man sits when he has just learned something that he needs time to place correctly in his understanding of the world. After the second demonstration, Sokolov was given the microphone by the event director. This was not unusual. Several practitioners had addressed the room that day. It was a cultural exchange. Remarks were expected. What came next was not expected. Sokolov spoke in Russian. The interpreter at the edge of the mat conveyed the words into English in real time, and then the English was translated into 3 other languages by observers near the walls. What Sokolov said in the version that was translated into English and written down by a British sports journalist named David Hale, who was covering the event for a magazine that no longer exists, was this. He said that he had traveled extensively in the preceding 2 years. He said that he had seen a number of martial arts demonstrations in Japan and Hong Kong and West Germany. He said that he respected the traditions those arts represented. And then he said, with the particular precision of a man who has chosen his words carefully and means them, that he did not believe any of those arts had practical application against a genuinely trained wrestler of his size. He said the word practical twice. He said that the demonstrations he had seen were exhibitions. He said that the practitioners of those arts were, in his assessment, performers rather than fighters. He said this while the man in the folding chair in the 3rd row was still holding his cup of tea. There was a pause in the room of the specific kind that follows a statement that everyone has heard and no one is willing to be the first to address. The French observer later described it as a pressure change, the way air feels before a weather system moves through. Then Bruce Lee set his cup of tea down on the floor beside his chair. He set it down deliberately, with both hands, as though the placement of the cup was a decision he had made and was now executing with appropriate care. He stood. He removed his jacket. He folded it once along the lapels and laid it across the back of his chair. He walked toward the mat. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture. He walked at the pace of a man who has decided where he is going and sees no reason to alter the pace of that decision. He has already lost. Viktor Sokolov. He has already lost. He does not know it yet. The recognition moved through the room in the way these things move. Not all at once, but in a current, row by row, practitioner by practitioner, as men who had seen the films or attended the demonstrations or simply read the accounts began to understand who had just stood up from the folding chair in the 3rd row. The tournament director, a man named Gregor Pavlov, who had organized Soviet national championships for 14 years, later said that the shift in the room was audible, not loud, not a single sound, a change in the texture of the silence. David Hale, the British journalist, wrote that he looked at Sokolov's face at the moment the recognition was completing itself around the room, and that Sokolov's expression did not change. He wrote that he found this both admirable and troubling. Admirable because it indicated genuine composure. Troubling because it indicated that Sokolov had not yet understood what the change in the room meant. Bruce Lee stopped 8 feet from Viktor Sokolov. He stood with his feet at a particular angle, his hands at his sides, his weight distributed in a way that did not announce itself. He looked at Sokolov. He said 4 words. He said them quietly enough that the interpreter had to ask him to repeat them, and when he repeated them, they were the same 4 words at the same volume. The words were, "Show me what happened." At this point in the account, if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do it now. Because what happened in the next 47 seconds on that mat in Moscow in January of 1972 is the reason this story has been told in training halls on 4 continents for 50 years, and we are about to go through it in the order it happened. And you do not want to miss the moment it turns. Viktor Sokolov moved first. This is not in dispute. He moved at the 6-second mark after Bruce Lee's 4 words. He moved because he had been standing in the same position for 6 seconds while a man 90 pounds lighter than him said 4 quiet words and waited, and the room around him had changed its quality and had not changed back. And Sokolov was a man who responded to discomfort with action. This is not a character flaw. It is a trained response. In wrestling, hesitation is a gift to the opponent. Sokolov had been trained since the age of 9 to answer hesitation with movement. He moved. He did not lunge. This point is essential and was emphasized independently by 4 of the witnesses. Viktor Sokolov was not reckless. He moved with technique. He initiated a tie-up approach, which in wrestling is the controlled establishment of contact that precedes the setup for a throw or takedown. His hands came up at the correct height. His weight shifted correctly. His approach covered the 8 feet between them in approximately 2 seconds and was technically sound by every standard the witnesses possessed to evaluate it. Second one, Sokolov's right hand reached for Bruce Lee's left shoulder. The hand did not arrive. What happened instead was described by the event director Gregor Pavlov in a letter he wrote 12 years later, in which he said that the space where Bruce Lee had been standing was simply no longer occupied. He wrote that he had seen many fast men in his career and that fast had always meant a motion he could track and reconstruct afterward. He wrote that this was the first time in his career that he was unable to reconstruct what he had seen, only what had preceded it and what followed. Bruce Lee had moved laterally by approximately 22 inches. The movement had not been backward. It had been at an angle to Sokolov's approach that placed Lee outside Sokolov's extended right arm, in the space beside him rather than in front of him. Second 2, Sokolov adjusted. This is the mark of a genuine athlete under pressure, and it should be named as such. He did not stop. He did not hesitate. He felt the absence of resistance on his right side, and his body began immediately to correct for it. His left hand came across. He turned his weight into the new direction. He was attempting to re-establish contact, and he was attempting it correctly. A fight is not 2 men hitting each other. A fight is a conversation about distance. The man who controls the distance controls the conversation. Viktor Sokolov was a master of closing distance. He had spent 11 years learning to close distance against men who were trained to resist exactly that. Bruce Lee did not resist it. He did not close against it. He managed it. These are entirely different disciplines, and they operate on entirely different assumptions about what a physical confrontation is. Sokolov was operating on an assumption that had been true for 11 years. The assumption was that if you close the distance and establish grip, the fight is yours. He was not wrong to hold that assumption. It had been true 11 times without exception. It was not true on this occasion. Second 3. Sokolov's left hand made contact. This is the only moment in the encounter in which contact was established between the 2 men, and it lasted less than 1 second. The hand reached Lee's right forearm, and Sokolov's grip began to close. What happened next is the part of this story that the witnesses argued about for the rest of their careers, not in terms of what occurred, but in terms of how to describe it. Lee did not pull away from the grip. He moved with it, briefly, in the direction of Sokolov's pull, and then at a point that no witness was able to precisely identify, he redirected that motion in a direction that was not the direction of the pull and was not the direction away from the pull, but was a third direction that several witnesses said they had not known existed in that geometry until they saw it used. Sokolov's grip did not release. It was broken. These are different things. The grip released would mean Sokolov chose to let go. The grip was broken means that the structural premise on which the grip was built was removed. When you remove the premise of a grip, the fingers open without instruction. Fourth second, Sokolov was moving forward. He had been moving forward since second 1, and his momentum was genuine and substantial, and was now, for the first time in 11 years of competition, not connected to anything. The 302 pounds of Viktor Sokolov, moving at the speed he had been moving, with no resistance and no anchor point, continued in the direction they had been moving. The floor of the Dynamo Sports Palace came up to meet him. He did not fall violently. This was also noted by multiple witnesses, and the notation is important. He went to the floor in a controlled manner insofar as the situation permitted control, which is to say that he did not land on his face or his skull. He landed on his left side. He slid approximately 3 feet on the competition mat. He stopped. The tournament director, Gregor Pavlov, had both hands flat on the table in front of him. The interpreter stood with his notepad at his side and did not write anything. David Hale, the British journalist, had set down his pen without being aware of doing so. A Soviet wrestling coach named Andrei Volkov, who was sitting near the mat and who had been coaching for 20 years and who had never in that career made a sound during a match that he was not a participant in, made a sound. His colleague beside him later described the sound as involuntary. Bruce Lee stood 2.5 feet from where Sokolov had come to rest on the floor. He was standing in the same way he had been standing when he stopped 8 feet away, his feet at the same angle, his hands at his sides. He was not breathing hard. He was not changed in any way that was visible from the distance at which the witnesses were observing him. He did not look around the room. He did not look at the audience. He looked at Viktor Sokolov. His right hand extended downward, palm open, at the height where a man's hand would naturally be when he is offering it to someone on the floor. He waited. What happened in the next 4 seconds was the thing that Andrei Volkov, the wrestling coach, spent the rest of his career telling his students about. Not the movement, not the redirection, not the 3 seconds it had taken to put a 300-pound man on the floor. What he told his students about was the 4 seconds of the open hand. Viktor Sokolov lay on his left side on the mat of the Dynamo Sports Palace. He was looking at the hand. You could see from the faces of the people in the room who were watching his face that he was thinking. Not recovering. Not resting. Thinking. He was at a fork. On one side of the fork was the hand and what accepting the hand meant. On the other side of the fork was what a man does when he has spent his entire adult life being the largest and strongest person in any room he walked into and has just discovered that neither of those facts was relevant. Viktor Sokolov took the hand. He did not take it immediately. He took it after 3 of the 4 seconds had passed. But he took it. He allowed Bruce Lee to pull him to his feet. He stood up. He was not injured. The physical contact of the event had lasted less than 1 second and had concluded without harm, and this too was not accidental. They stood facing each other. Sokolov was 8 inches taller. He looked at Bruce Lee for a moment that no one in the room timed, but that Hale estimated in his notes at approximately 6 seconds. Then Sokolov spoke. He spoke in Russian, quietly enough that only Lee and the interpreter beside them could hear him. The interpreter conveyed the words into English. The exchange was private. The room did not hear it. What Sokolov said in that private exchange was not made public immediately. It moved outward the way things move when witnesses carry them. The interpreter told one person, that person told others. By the time the story had traveled through the room and out of the building and into the training halls and coaches' offices where it would spend the next 30 years, the sentence had accumulated several versions. Some versions made it grander, some versions made it simpler. What the interpreter said he heard, in the account he gave to a German documentary filmmaker 17 years later, was that Sokolov said, "I was prepared to fight every technique I had studied. I was not prepared for what you just did." Bruce Lee responded. The interpreter conveyed 2 words. The 2 words were, "I know." He picked up his jacket from the chair in the 3rd row. He put it on. He buttoned 1 button. He picked up his cup of tea from the floor beside the chair leg. The tea had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Then he walked out of the building. He did not speak to the press. He did not give an account of what had happened. He had not been contacted by any publication regarding the event. As far as the record shows, Bruce Lee never once in the remaining time of his life told this story himself. Viktor Sokolov did not retire after Moscow. He competed for 3 more years and won 2 additional national championships. He coached at the national level for a decade after that. He was known, in the accounts of his students, as an unusually patient teacher for a man of his accomplishments. Several of his students recalled that he had a particular habit when a younger wrestler became overconfident. He would stop the session. He would wait until he had the student's attention. He would say, quietly and without drama, "You are prepared for what you have studied. Make certain you know what that leaves out." Nobody ever asked Sokolov directly where that line came from. Nobody who knew the story needed to ask. The event director, Gregor Pavlov, was questioned about the Moscow exchange twice in his career, once by a Soviet sports magazine and once by a Western journalist. On both occasions, he declined to provide a formal account. He said only that he had organized 38 national championships and had never, before or after that January afternoon, seen the particular thing he saw on that mat. He was asked to be specific about what the particular thing was. He said the specific thing was watching a very large man discover that his understanding of the world was incomplete and watching him choose what to do about it. The wrestling coach Andrei Volkov told the story in his training hall for the remainder of his coaching career. He told it at the beginning of every new cycle with a new class of students. He told it not to diminish Sokolov, whom he respected, but to make a point about the architecture of certainty. He would say, Viktor Sokolov was not defeated by a smaller man. Viktor Sokolov was defeated by a category of problem he had never included in his preparation. The smaller man was simply the messenger. David Hale, the British journalist, published nothing about the event at the time. The magazine he was filing for had commissioned a general cultural exchange piece, and the incident in question did not fit the scope of the assignment as it had been defined. He kept his notes. 31 years later, in 2003, he gave an interview to a martial arts journal in which he was asked about the most significant thing he had witnessed in 40 years of covering combat sport. He said, Moscow, January 1972, without hesitation. He said that he had been present at 12 World Championship events, and that nothing he had seen at any of them had changed his understanding of what a human body was capable of to the degree that those 47 seconds in the Dynamo Sports Palace had changed it. He was asked why he had never written about it. He said he had tried 3 times and had never been able to write it in a way that conveyed the specific quality of what he had seen. He said the difficulty was that the event on paper looked like a fight that was won, and what he had actually witnessed was a conversation that ended. He said those were different things, and that the difference was everything. What the Dynamo Sports Palace held that day in 1972 was not simply a physical event. It was a demonstration of a principle that has no comfortable home in the vocabulary of competition because it does not fit the categories that competition provides. It was a reminder that size is a measurement, and strength is a measurement, and a record of victories is a measurement, and that measurements describe the world only up to the boundaries of what has been measured. Everything outside those boundaries remains until you encounter it, theoretical. Viktor Sokolov was not a lesser man for what happened on that mat. He was a better one. He proved it in the 4 seconds before he took the hand. And he proved it again in the way he walked off the mat, and in the way he coached for the rest of his career, and in the sentence he gave his students without attribution for 30 years. The choice to take the hand is not a small thing. It is the thing. A man who has built his entire identity on a particular kind of strength, and who has that identity tested in public, before the peers he respects most, has been offered something rare and genuinely painful. Sokolov took what was offered. That is the story. The 47 seconds on the mat are the delivery mechanism. The 4 seconds of the open hand are the point. The man who left the building alone that afternoon with a cold cup of tea and a jacket buttoned against the January air of a city he did not live in never sought acknowledgement for what had happened. He did not tell the story. He did not ask for it to be told. He understood that the lesson was not about him. He understood that a lesson does not belong to the person who delivers it. It belongs to the person who receives it and decides what to do with it. Perception is not proof. What a man knows about himself and what is actually true are 2 different inventories, and most men spend their entire lives without ever being required to compare them. The ones who are required to compare them and who survive the comparison honestly become the teachers. Sokolov became a teacher. That is not a consolation. That is the destination. Next week, this channel will cover the evening in Los Angeles in 1969 when Chuck Norris walked into a closed rehearsal on the Warner Brothers lot and found himself across the mat from a man he had studied under for 3 years in front of 12 witnesses with a single question that had to be answered without words. That story has not been told in full before. Be here for it.